22nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. And because of the motion on the 16th of November, the committee is meeting to discuss relations between the Canadian government and Facebook. I would now like to remind you of a few rules. Mr. Sims repeated them each time, so I'm sure you know them, but we will say them again today. So you may express yourself in the language of your choice. Interpretation service is available to everyone. At the bottom of your screen, you may choose between the options floor, English, or French. When you take the floor, please click on the microphone icon to turn your microphone on, and when you're finished, please put yourself back on mute because that will minimize interference. Everyone must take the floor through me, through the chair. And if anyone wishes to take the floor at any time, please turn on your microphone and make a point of order. If any MP wishes to take the floor after a point of order raised by another member, please raise your hand virtually to let me know. And if you notice that I haven't seen you, then you can raise your hand or make a sign on your screen physically. It is not allowed to take photos or screenshots. If there are any technical difficulties, please let me know immediately, and we may have to suspend the meeting in such a case to make sure all participants can participate fully. Today, we are welcoming guests from Facebook. Our witnesses are Kevin Chan, Global Director and Head of Public Policy of Facebook Canada, who has already appeared before the committee. We have Mark Dinsdale, Head of Media Partnerships at Facebook Canada, and Ms. Rachel Curran, Policy Manager for Facebook Canada. I'm not sure who will be taking the floor first, or if all of you will be speaking, Mr. Chan. I believe that you have 10 minutes, as the committee agreed, for your opening statement, and then we'll have a question period.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Members, thank you for inviting us to your meeting. We understand that the committee wishes to learn more about our decision to restrict access to news content in Australia last month. I am happy to address this to the best of my ability. As you may know, news has since been restored on Facebook following key amendments in the Australian News Bargaining Code legislation. The decision to restrict access to news was made with a heavy heart and came after years of working to find a solution in Australia that recognizes the realities of how our services work. Years of working to find a solution in Australia that recognizes the realities of how our services work. Unfortunately, the proposed legislation did not acknowledge basic facts about the internet, did not recognize the value that platforms provide to news publishers, stood to benefit only large media conglomerates and not independent media outlets, and sought to penalize Facebook for content it didn't take or ask for. We are pleased that we have now reached an agreement in Australia that recognizes the value that Facebook brings to publishers. The agreement provides the flexibility for us to support small and local publishers whose work is critical to public interest journalism. The agreement also allows Facebook to retain the ability to decide if news appears on our platform so that we won't automatically be subject to a forced negotiation.
Since we signed that agreement, we have signed agreements with 4 publishers in Australia. As is the case elsewhere in the world, we will continue to invest more in the long-term sustainability of journalism, not because it's good for our business, but because it's good for democracy and society. It is important to note that we recognize that these difficult times are having a very adverse impact on the Canadian media industry. The past 2 decades of shifting consumer behavior from print to online have been very rough on the media. My colleagues and I are working hard every day to do our part and help publishers adapt.
We work directly with Canadian news publishers, large and small, to help them maximize the value that free Facebook tools provide for their businesses. This includes free distribution of the news links they share on Facebook, which sends people directly to their websites, a value we estimate to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year for the Canadian news industry alone. Jeff Elgie, the CEO of Village Media based in Sault Ste. Marie, estimates that in the month of January 2021 alone, Facebook and Google generated 24 million page views for Village Media for free, which he calculates is worth about $480,000 to his news business that month. Over the past 4 years, we have gone further by directly investing over $10 million in partnerships and programs to encourage and support the development of sustainable business models for news organizations here in Canada. And just last week, we announced our plans to continue this work with an additional $8 million in news programs over the next 3 years. Mark Dinsdale, our head of news partnerships in Canada, will provide you with some highlights from these investments.
Thanks, Kevin. One of our signature investments is the Facebook Canadian Press News Fellowship, which began in 2020 as a $1 million program to create 8 new local journalism positions across Canada. CP publishes their stories to its wire service, making the fellows' work available for distribution to more than 1,000 Canadian news outlets in the CP network and in both official languages. In January 2021, based on the early success of this program, we expanded it to include 2 new positions for emerging Indigenous reporters, bringing the total net new journalism positions we've created to 10. Last week, we announced a 3-year renewal of the Facebook Canadian Press News Fellowship. For COVID, we announced in April 2020 a total of $1 million in grants to support Canadian and US local news organizations covering the coronavirus. 81 Canadian publishers each received a $5,000 US dollar grant to cover unexpected costs associated with reporting on the crisis in their communities, including The Coast, Halifax's Weekly, Temiskaming Printing from New Liskeard, Ontario, the Peterborough Currents, La Gazette de la Mauricie from Trois-Rivières, Autour de l'Île from Saint-Pierre de l'Île d'Orléans, Clark's Crossing Gazette in Warman, Saskatchewan, Le Franco from Edmonton, and the Medicine Hat News. Facebook's Accelerator program helps news publishers navigate the digital transition to build sustainable businesses. Since May 2019, 15 Canadian publishers have participated in the Accelerator program, including Post Media, The Globe and Mail, La Presse, Brunswick News, Winnipeg Free Press, Le Soleil, Glacier Media, The Discourse, Daily Hive, Northern News Services, The Tyee, The Narwhal, The Sprawl, and Village Media. Paul Salmon, the editor-in-chief of the Winnipeg Free Press, has stated that the key impact to date of working with the Facebook Accelerator program is that we've been able to share a new vision for a profitable future based on online audience growth at both the executive level of the company as well as with our board of directors and ownership group. Je cède maintenant la parole à Kevin pour quelques...
I'll now turn it over to Kevin for some closing remarks.
You're on mute, Kevin.
Oh, merci. Merci, Marc.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Facebook is deeply committed to supporting news in Canada. We have been doing so for years. As we noted earlier, we intend to do even more. Over the next 3 years, we will be making an additional investment of $8 million into the Canadian news ecosystem through a 3-year renewal of the Facebook Canadian Press News Fellowship and new funding to increase the capacity of underrepresented voices in journalism. This brings our total investment to date in the Canadian news ecosystem to $18 million over a period of 6 years. We also announced that we hope to partner with Canadian publishers on commercial deals that allow us to experiment with ways to connect people to more news on Facebook. It is important for me to be clear what this type of paid partnership could be and what it is not. Currently, when Facebook users see news content in their feeds, they typically see a short preview text generated by the publishers themselves, and then a link to take the user from Facebook to the publisher's own website. We do not pay publishers for sharing this kind of content on Facebook. They choose to do so because it drives value to them. As noted earlier, Village Media assesses the value of traffic from Facebook and Google to be close to $500,000 in 1 month alone. Another example is the Globe and Mail, which achieved record digital subscription growth in 2020, in part by combining its AI platform and publishing strategies with Facebook's tools. The committee has a package, my understanding is, that's been translated. You will receive it tomorrow, my understanding is, from the committee clerk, but it includes this case study with the Globe and Mail. In some cases, we may see additional value in partnering with publishers to provide links to more stories on our platform for user experiences beyond what is already being shared by publishers themselves. If we are actively seeking to provide a certain kind of user experience that requires more from publishers, then we would proceed by striking a commercial agreement with the publisher in order to use the additional article links for that purpose. We hope to partner with Canadian publishers on commercial deals that allow us to experiment with ways to bring more value to them.
In conclusion, finding a sustainable and equitable way to foster a strong media ecosystem in Canada requires goodwill and cooperation among publishers of all sizes, digital platforms, government, and people who value the news and are willing to pay for it. Facebook can play a role in this, but cannot do it alone. Cross-party discussions have been too infrequent so far, and it is time to come together to ensure that journalism is set on a long-term sustainable path.
Mr. Chair, we are happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Mr. Dinsdale, for your presentation. I will give the floor right away to Mr. Kevin Waugh, who will be questioning you for 6 minutes.
All right. Thank you, new chair. It's a pleasure to see you in that chair here this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chan and Dinsdale. You know, the $8 million that you announced on Thursday or Friday, I'm a little cynical about it. You knew you were coming to this committee on Monday, and then all of a sudden you bring out another $8 million to support, you know, your news fellowship. Maybe just talk about that. I guess, Mark, that would go to you. Why the timing on Friday with the announcement of an additional $8 million from Facebook?
Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, si vous me permettez.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I believe that Mr. Waugh's camera is perhaps not selected properly. I can't see his handsome face. Oh, there he is.
Mr. Champoux.
Thank you, Mr. Champoux. Mr. Waugh, we were very scared that you had disappeared.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Waugh.
Yeah.
I think that the way that we look at these investments is that they are a continuation of what we've been doing for several years. If we go back to 2017 and the beginning of these commitments with the Digital News Innovation Challenge, which helped some publishers like the Sprawl grow their presences and built a more sustainable future. We have been doing these types of engagements since then through the accelerator programs, through COVID grants, et cetera. And these programs, these commitments that we're making in the future as well, have been planned for a long time and have been under negotiation and discussion with partners for a long time. So that is, you know, the purpose of our commitment is to make sure that we're able to help publishers build towards a sustainable future.
I just thought the timing was a little ironic. You know, you're coming to committee, and I realize you have committed 10 million before, additional 8, but that's fine. Mr. Chan, Rupert Murdoch played a big part in Australia, getting news platforms to get paid from Facebook. I know when you talked January 29th here, and you talked here this morning, that Facebook, in your opinion, generates hundreds of millions of dollars worth of flow-through traffic to Canadian journalism organizations. And you mentioned Village Media here today. What evidence, though, can you share that supports this statement that you made again here this morning? Because, you know, Facebook is not going to pay for news links, as you mentioned, or content that publishers voluntarily put on Facebook. So I'd like to hear the numbers that Facebook is. I mean, give me some financial numbers that news publishers are getting.
Well, Mr. Waugh, thank you for the question. I think the best answer, and probably the one that's going to be most solid, will be answers that come from the publishers themselves. And so today we are sharing with the committee the impact, if you will, from two publishers, one big, one small. And I hope Jeff will forgive me if I say that he's small, because I'm sure that he is doing very well in Sault Ste. Marie and in the markets he's operating in. But obviously, it's not a national outlet. So if we look at Jeff Elgie and Village Media, that has various that's involved in various local news markets in Northern Ontario. They themselves, and I think that's the best way to get the numbers, don't take it from Facebook, you should take it from the publishers themselves. He is saying that in January of 2021, free distribution from two platforms alone, so Google and Facebook, accounted for 24 million page views back to his site. And more concretely, as a business, if you were to ask him, well, what is the value of that 24 million page views? His estimate is close to $500,000 in January 2021. So that's the Village Media case. Now, in the Globe and Mail case, we, as I said, the package is with the committee. It is translated into both official languages, but I was told that the committee would not receive these until tomorrow, and
okay.
I regret that, but I understand that there was no way around it, although we did submit it earlier last week. The Globe and Mail case study shows how a publisher that's pursuing a different strategy, so not just ads, but also subscription, which is very important, if I understand correctly from the Globe and Mail, by combining their award-winning Sophie AI technology, by combining that with free Facebook tools, they have had in part, due to these Facebook tools, they've had a record subscription year in 2020. And we did a joint case study with them, so they obviously signed off on it. And you can read up on the case study to understand how they feel they've found success on Facebook. And of course, we hope that these case studies, we put them out there to the public, and they're also available online, so that other publishers, and including publishers in Canada, can learn from the success of the Globe and Mail.
Who controls the data around the news that is used by your organization, Facebook? Who controls that data?
Sir, if you mean by, well, again, I mean, perhaps I will answer your question, but perhaps I should just clarify. When a publisher shares news links onto Facebook, people may see these news links in their own feeds.
Yep.
They will click through, they click, sir, and then they go back to the site, and then they can build that direct relationship with publishers. And so I think one of the key things we have heard actually from publishers is that in fact they want to be able to develop that direct relationship with their readers, with their potential customers. And so by redirecting traffic back to them, they're able to do that. And if I may say, sir, also, it's not that different, for example, than you may be.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. I must cut you off there. You may have another opportunity later. Thank you, Mr. Waugh. I'll now give the floor to the Honorable Mr. Housefather. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Witnesses, and for the record, I want to say I hold all these witnesses in very high esteem and appreciate you being here. I do believe that elected officials and social media providers need to work together on sound public policy. With that being said, my job is to get answers for Canadians. I have a lot of questions. So again, I would appreciate succinct responses. And Mr. Chan, unless otherwise mentioned, my questions are for you. Mr. Chan, who is the CEO of Facebook?
That is Mark Zuckerberg.
Mr. Chan, Facebook is a closely held public company, and that's because there is one individual that controls a majority of the voting shares. Who is that person?
The majority shareholder is Mark Zuckerberg.
And as a result of holding a majority of shares, Mr. Zuckerberg also controls who's on the Facebook board of directors. You currently have 9 directors. 7 of them are independent directors. 2 of them are Facebook employees. Who are those 2 Facebook employees who are directors?
I haven't checked recently, but I believe it's Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg.
You are correct. And Mr. Zuckerberg is also the chairman of the board, correct?
I believe that to be true.
Thank you very much. Under the corporate governance guidelines published on Facebook's website, the board of directors acts as management team's advisor. Mr. Chan, did the board of directors advise the management of Facebook on Facebook's decision to block Australian users from sharing news articles on February 17th, 2021?
Oh, sir, I'm not privy to that information.
You're not privy to that because you're not on the board of directors, so you don't attend the board meetings. Would that be correct?
That is one reason, yes.
And you're not privy to the unredacted board minutes that would give you this information, correct?
I have not asked and I'm not privy to it.
Mr. Zuckerberg, though, is on the board and he was privy to both what happened at board meetings and to the minutes of these board meetings, correct?
Presumably.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chen, on January 30th, 2021, Australian Treasurer Josh Friedenberg stated that Mr. Zuckerberg had called him and other Australian lawmakers to talk about the news media bargaining code. Were you on those phone calls?
I was not.
So you couldn't tell us what representations Mr. Zuckerberg made to Australian lawmakers, correct?
I cannot tell you anything that was personally conveyed on either side.
I understand. And Mr. Friedenberg then stated on February 18th that he had again been called by Mr. Zuckerberg for 2 consecutive days. You weren't on those calls either, were you?
I was not.
Okay. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison stated at the same time that Facebook was making threats and it was not a good way to deal with his government. And you would be, I guess, unable to tell me if Mr. Zuckerberg made threats on the phone calls with Mr. Friedenberg, correct?
I would never characterize Facebook as making threats to anyone, sir.
And that's a very good comment from any good Facebook employee, and I agree with you. I appreciate that. And I won't characterize it that either. I was just making the point that you weren't on the calls. So given that we've now established that a lot of the questions the committee members have would be ones that Mr. Zuckerberg can answer, but that you cannot answer, Mr. Chen, are you aware that this committee invited Mr. Zuckerberg to appear and that when he declined our invitation, we adopted a motion to send him a summons?
I am aware, based on media reports, that that was done, yes.
And are you aware that Facebook's Canadian counsel responded to our clerk saying that he was not authorized to accept a summons for Mr. Zuckerberg?
I was notified by counsel that that would be the response.
And Mr. Chen, I'm sure you're aware that Mr. Zuckerberg testified last week before a congressional subcommittee. Do you know how many times in the last 6 months Mr. Zuckerberg has testified before congressional committees?
I do not.
It's 3. And he's testified before Congress 7 times. So, Mr. Chen, since Mr. Zuckerberg takes his responsibility to U.S. lawmakers so seriously, can you explain to us why he repeatedly refuses invitations and indeed summonses from Canadian parliamentary committees?
Sure. I mean, as you point out, Mr. Housefather, it was very, Mark was very much engaged with, as an American, engaged with the U.S. congressional process last week. It so happens that your committee has requested an appearance today, and of course, it's Canadian representatives of the company that are here before you today. As Facebook, we are, as you can appreciate, a platform that is operating in many different countries around the world. And it is always the case that when Parliament wishes to speak to representatives of the company, we will always be there, as we have been with the Canadian Heritage Committee, regardless of the topic. We are happy to engage, and the company has a similar posture around the world.
So basically, Mr. Chen, as soon as Australia announced that it would propose legislation that Facebook did not like, Mr. Zuckerberg reportedly reached out to Australian lawmakers directly. So it seems to me, based on your testimony, that unless we're going to do something like Australia did, Mr. Zuckerberg doesn't plan to come to Canada. How much is your ad revenue in Canada on an annual basis, Mr. Chen?
I'm not aware of that number.
Is Mr. Zuckerberg perhaps aware of that number?
I'm not sure.
Is he aware that there's 25 million Facebook users in Canada?
There's 24 million Canadian.
24 million. And it sounds like a substantial number. And again, this committee has now asked to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg on a couple of occasions. The ethics committee did as well. He has refused our invitations. And it sounds, again, like the questions I wanted to ask you were unable to answer because they were individual issues that Mr. Zuckerberg himself could have asked. So I would like to ask you on behalf of this committee to please convey to Mr. Zuckerberg that we would like to hear from him.
I will pass on the message when I get the chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Monsieur le Président, je
Mr. Chair, Thank you, Mr. Housefather. We're up to 6 minutes now, and I'm trying to be strict with everyone. So I'll now give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Champoux. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I admire your strictness, and I, of course, want to welcome all guests from Facebook today. Mr. Chan, do you think that Facebook has some sort of responsibility over the content shared on your members' pages? Yes, we have a responsibility for the operation of the platform, a responsibility to respect laws. For the content, do you think you have a responsibility over the content? Mr. Champoux, I just answered that we have a responsibility to respect Canadian laws regarding our content. We also have a responsibility to follow our own rules called community standards, which are relevant to the content. That title, we spoke to you about it last time you were here with us. You said that you have moderators around the world who monitor the content shared on your platform. Yes? Oh,
En fait, j'affirmais,
I was just making an affirmation that you have legislators, human beings who oversee the algorithms.
La première fois, je vous ai demandé si vous
Yes. Last time I asked you if you have francophone moderators located in Quebec or in Canada, and you said you weren't able to answer, and you said that could even endanger the lives of those people. Do you still stand by what you said, Mr. Chan? And can you tell me if you have any francophone moderators in Quebec or Canada today?
We don't reveal the location of moderators across the world. As I indicated, I think last time, we have to cover off over 50 languages around the world, and also every time zone available in the world. And so we do sort of locate individuals and teams based on these considerations.
D'accord. Alors, je vais...
Okay. I will take that as a no. You do not have any francophone moderators in Quebec. It was a simple question. Mr. Chan, you remember the sad Christchurch events. Did you have any control over the content that was shared over your platform? Because here we are talking about Facebook's control over news, and you do have certain control over what is shared over your platform. For 17 minutes, the Christchurch killer live streamed his actions over Facebook. Do you think you would have been able to interrupt that?
Well, we ultimately were able to detect it and remove it, as you point out. I think that, of course, we regret the tragedy, and we regret that we were not even faster. But I think that we have obviously learned a lot from that terrible incident. Not just at Facebook, I think, to be fair, we've worked across the sector to build systems and protocols with governments as well to ensure that the entire system actually works not just at Facebook, but across companies, across platforms, and with governments, that we build these protocols to move much faster should, again, the regrettable and unfortunate thing happen again.
Donc, on s'est...
So we understand that you were aware of this event and you have taken measures to act more quickly in the future. Now, on misinformation. Last week, Facebook deleted about hundreds of false accounts. It was billions. Okay, well, I congratulate you on that. There are still accounts that are active. For example, there were 12 people responsible for 73% of the anti-vaccine content on the platform based on disinformation or unreliably sourced information. Mr. Zuckerberg said he had no intention to delete these 12 accounts that generate 73% of anti-vaccine content. Can you explain the justification for that position?
To be honest, I'm not entirely familiar with the specific case you're talking about, sir, but I can tell you more generally, our posture is in fact to remove harmful misinformation about COVID vaccines. And I can tell you, I myself have spent many hours working with our content policy team to frame up the actual content policy that would govern speech about the vaccine. I think that we have already removed significant amounts. I think I think one of our latest statistics is in February, we've removed 12 million pieces of content related to the COVID COVID vaccine misinformation. But I think the challenge, sir, if you'll appreciate, and we do this with public health agencies and public health experts around the world, and they'll tell you the same thing. The challenge is we do need to strike a balance between people's ability to speak their minds and share their own feelings and ideas and thinking about things, and also prevent harmful misinformation about the COVID, about the vaccine from being spread.
Si je vous ai...
So if I clearly told you what the 12 accounts were, and I told you that they were responsible for such spread of disinformation, what would your position be? Mr. Champoux, your time is up. You even went a little over time because I was having mic troubles. But we will have more time to ask your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chan. So I will now hand it over to Ms. McPherson to continue questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking this on and doing such a good job today. And I'd also, of course, like to thank the witnesses for joining us today at committee and agreeing to answer some of our questions. I'm very concerned when I hear the inability of some of the witnesses to answer those questions, and I would echo what my colleague Mr. Housefather had said, that it seems very important that Mr. Zuckerberg agree to come and share his thoughts with this committee, because unfortunately we're not able to get some of the answers that we need from this committee. And I have to just start by saying, you know, people are increasingly concerned about the power of the web giants and the ravages of the spread of online hate speech, the impact of unfair competition of these giants on our local media, and the total lack of justice when people work hard to pay their fair share and multinational web companies do everything to circumvent the rules. People are right to have these fears, and when they learn about the cozy relationship between these web giants and the Liberal government. I would like to remind you that we are here because we discovered that Minister Gibault's department in charge of regulating the web giants agreed to share a job offer to Facebook, and that this lack of ethics is even more unacceptable when we know that this government continues to protect Facebook's profit at the expense of the survival of our local media. Continues to protect the profits of the web giants by refusing to make them pay their fair share at the expense of our workers and small businesses who do pay their fair share, and continue to delay regulating the platforms at the expense of the people and communities that suffer from online hate. So, you know, the NDP will continue to press the Liberal government to end this favorable treatment of the web giants and protect the interests of Canadians. And I would I guess, like to start by asking some questions about some of those ethical issues that I've raised. In your last appearance at committee, Mr. Chan, when asked if you had ever asked political staff in a ministerial cabinet to circulate a job offer for Facebook, you replied, "I don't think so." Could you now answer that same question with a yes or a no? And if it's a yes, which ministerial cabinet?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay. So you asked the department, Mr. Chen, you asked the department in charge of your regulation to share a job offer for Facebook with details of the salary conditions. And okay. I just wanted to make that clear.
Well, if I may, ma'am, it's important because we do care about facts and the truth. Monsieur Président, si vous me permettez,
Mr. Chair.
The opening, I believe, in Madame McPherson, with all due respect, I believe that the use of the term job offer is false. It is a distortion of the truth.
How would you describe it? You didn't.
Ma'am, it was a job poster that was public, that was circulated to everybody far and wide on social media, on various platforms. And I will remind I will remind you that it is obviously an open job poster.
One that you also did send to staff,
ma'am. Nobody was interviewed from Canadian Heritage.
Not really the point, though, Mr. Chan.
But ma'am,
the
facts are important, ma'am, and it is important that we show love and courage to people when we bring them before the committee. And I would want to be very respectful to you. But again,
okay, Mr. Chan, I'm going to carry on to some other questions, and I will just point out that as has been brought up already, that my job as the opposition is to ask some questions that may be difficult for you.
And we are here to answer them, ma'am.
Thank you.
We will answer them based on truth.
In the Canadian market, Mr. Chan, what was the net profit made by Facebook during the year 2020?
I'm not aware of that number, ma'am.
Excluding payroll taxes, how much tax did Facebook on it?
I'm not aware of that, but I also believe it's commercially confidential, ma'am.
For the year 2020, what was your advertising revenue with Canadian media content in Canada?
With media content would be zero, ma'am.
So Professor Jean-Hugues Roy estimated that Facebook's advertising revenue in Canada related to journalistic content was approximately 210 million for Facebook. Concerning this estimate, Mr. Chan, you responded via a written statement to the media that these estimates are wrong. If this is the case, what is the real number? And it would be irresponsible, I guess I would just point out, it would be irresponsible of you to question the work of a researcher if you don't actually have that number.
Well, ma'am, I believe you're referring to Professor Jean-Hugues Roy at UQAM, at l'Université de Québec à Montréal. I did have a conversation with Professor Hugues afterwards, which he then subsequently wrote into an article. And he agreed with me, in his own words, que son analyse est...
That his analysis?
Defective. Again, as I explained to Professor Roy, we do not make money. Ads are not placed next to news articles to make money. That's not how our ad product works. And ma'am, I mean, I just took a look at your Facebook page through our ad library just this morning, and I know you were running ads as late as yesterday, and you will appreciate that you don't have an option to put ads next to news articles.
Well, and so what I'm wondering, though, is how you can say that it was incorrect without actually having some of those numbers that you can share with us.
Because, ma'am, that's not how, again, it's not how the platform works. I've just explained to you, as you will know, having run ads as late as yesterday, you do not have an option to put ads next to news articles.
So you don't have any of the commitment that you...
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. McPherson. We have them here for 2 hours, as I said, so you will have another opportunity to question them. We're now moving into the second round of questioning, 5 minutes per participant. And here is my colleague, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to our committee. I think it was Mr. Dinsdale that referred to the $5,000 specifically that went to local media to cover COVID. Does he have a list that he can supply us with all of those? I have 9 weeklies in my writing, so I would be very interested to see that list.
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe the list was publicly disclosed in one of our blog posts, but we can certainly follow up with you directly and supply the committee with the full list.
Thank you. As you would realize that in 9 weeklies, some are digital, some are just paper, some are both. They do cover a lot more than just local COVID. They cover the local municipal council, they cover the schools, they cover all those things that dailies don't cover. Their ask of me is, we need the advertising. It's the advertising that they survive by. News articles they don't survive by. What's your opinion on how the media will survive in my writing of 9 weeklies if they have no advertising dollars and the Canadian government gives it to you?
Again, thank you for the question. We certainly appreciate, and we have seen the challenge in a world where the advertising market is shifting to different types of solutions. The interesting part to me is when we look at examples of local news publishers like Village Media, who are, as Kevin pointed out, in 14 different Northern Ontario markets, They have been able to build a model
I'm
that
just
is
interrupting you because I'm talking about weekly newspapers only independent in one community. I'm not talking chains. I'm talking the 9 in my riding. They're not chains. They're independent. So you referring to those, to me, that's not local media. That's a chain.
well, they represent 14 communities and 14. Well, they represent news in 14 communities that range from the size of 50 to 150,000 people. And the point I was trying to make, sir, is that the model that they've built with Village Media is an interesting one that is probably replicable in more places, in that they have local classifieds, they have a local automotive section, they have a local events section, et cetera, which complements and adds base strategy to provide, what we have to look at in terms of the previous state of local news had all those things. And if you look at the model of a publisher like Village Media, they've successfully been able to maintain
I've got
those
very
things.
limited time, sir. And when that has happened here, the local news disappears. When you've got 9 involved in one chain, it disappears. But I want to go to the Mr. Chan. When you talk about a policy to do with what I would call censorship, would you share that policy with us?
We publish all of our policies, sir, online, and you can read them at facebook.com/community standards. Our content policies are called actually our community standards in public. I thank you, sir, for raising this concern about censorship. Obviously, we are very much mindful of that. Again, the delicate balance that we're trying to strike, sir, is to give people as much ability to express themselves as possible without expressing things that would be physically harmful if practiced.
Got that. But who determined who's writing the policy?
Well, sir, these policies are developed by the global policy team at Facebook. And
is there a Canadian component to that?
Yes, sir, I'm part of that, as is Rachel Curran.
So that policy has changed and is an ongoing living document?
These things do change, sir, based on the realities of people's speech and the way people interact. If you would, I would love to sort of let Rachel speak a bit about our consultation process around the world with experts and some that she's led herself, if that's helpful.
I'm referring to the Canadian interested in. If she can refer specifically to how you're developing policy, but you have published it. Could you share it specifically with the committee?
Yeah, as Kevin says, our community standards are really the formal expression of our content policy development. But that work is constantly underway, and we consult with experts, academics, civil society, citizens in Canada frequently as we develop those content policies, Mr. Shields. So yeah, we always try and make sure that we have a Canadian perspective on our content policies and that they work for Canadian users.
So you are part of that committee? Mr. Chan is part of that committee?
We are. Yeah, we both are.
How big is the committee?
Kevin, I don't know how large our global policy team is.
Yeah, I mean, I would not call it necessarily a committee. I would say it's a process, to be fair.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chan. I must interrupt, and I will give the floor to Ms. DeBruzen for her questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to all of the witnesses. This motion, really, to have this hearing today came on the heels of the decision by Facebook to cut access to news in Australia. And I believe that, Mr. Chan, when you've been speaking, you've been talking about the importance of public health information and the like. My question for you, though, is do you think it's an appropriate negotiation strategy with a government to cut access to the news, including public health news, during what is a pandemic?
Well, ma'am, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to answer that squarely. I really don't see this, and I don't think we should be seeing this as a negotiation. I mean, what it really was a response to a framework that wasn't going to be workable. If Facebook had sort of continued to offer news on Facebook in Australia, the framework would have required us to enter into a binding arbitration process with publishers by virtue of having things on our platform that we didn't control. that was not sustainable and would not be sustainable, I would submit to you, to any organization. It certainly is inconsistent with the idea of a free and open internet. And so our unfortunate response to an unworkable and piece of legislation that was not based on the facts was that we had to exit the market. And that's what happened.
Well, so some people would argue that Facebook is too large and needs to be broken up, and that its control, its ability to actually cut off access to news and public health information is too vast. Don't you believe that cutting off the news in Australia as a response to government legislation, doesn't that actually support that type of an argument that Facebook has become too large?
I don't think so, ma'am. I mean, again, I'm looking at the Canadian situation, and some of our experts over at the Ryerson Leadership Lab has come out with statistics looking at where Canadians actually get news. And if you look at what they've produced, the survey that I've seen is that about 25% of Canadians get some aspect of their news from Facebook, but actually it's like the fourth or fifth source, and the top source is TV. And also above Facebook is people navigating directly to newspaper websites. So I think that Facebook is one place, obviously, for people to get some part of their news diet, but it's not the case that Facebook is somehow synonymous with the internet or somehow synonymous with access to news, as data from the Ryerson Leadership Lab itself points out.
I'm just going to jump in then, because I'm glad you brought in the Canadian context. And as you know, Canadian government right now is looking at different models for local news. And I'm curious to get your opinion on, is this a strategy that Facebook would be using in Canada to cut off access to news and public health information? Should the government choose to take on legislation about local news here in Canada?
Well, I mean, we haven't seen any specific proposal, ma'am, from the government. It is never going to be something that we would ever want to do unless we really have no choice. And then, as I mentioned to you, in the case of Australia, the framework provided an exit, which was to say, if the regulatory burden is too high, then you can exit the market. But I am confident that in Canada, when we talk about a made in Canada approach, what we really mean is the ambition to do better, to build frameworks that are based on facts, that are based on the reality of how the internet
I only
works.
have 1 more minute, so I just want to jump in here, because when you were complaining about the Australian model, you talked about mandatory versus voluntary agreements and the binding natures of those. Why wouldn't a mandatory system be appropriate when dealing with these types of power imbalances with local news?
Well, the reality is, if you speak to some of the local news publishers, they'll tell you that, in fact, they are benefiting from being able to share freely. And as we gave you the numbers, not just like, don't take my word for it, I guess is what I'm saying, ma'am. Speak with Jeff Algie, CEO of Village Media, who has said that free distribution offers $500,000 in January 2021 alone for his business. And so I guess what I am humbly suggesting to this committee is that we should be reframing a bit, I think, how we look at this. It's the fact that, in fact, free platforms drive distribution back to publications on their directly on their sites, where they monetize when traffic is redirected.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chan, and thank you, Mr. Brusen. I said it was 5 minutes each, but you may also share your time. Time goes over to Mr. Shampoo now. Oh, I was hoping that you would forget that, but thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chan, I'm very interested in what you were just discussing with Mr. Brusen, but I'd like to go back to disinformation. It is known as a direct threat to public health in the COVID pandemic. La Presse wrote an article last week, as I said, 12 profiles responsible for 73% of vaccine content, obviously based on non-reliable sources. You say you fight against disinformation, you delete fake profiles, you also remove fake news. But in this particular case, why are you holding back? Why have you not deleted these accounts? I would like to know your personal opinion. If I told you about these 12 accounts that, according to public health, are a threat to public health, what would you say about this situation?
Welcome you to share these with us. We will take a look at them. Obviously, I cannot promise you that it would result in one outcome or another, but we would be very much interested in taking a look at these 12, and we will do our
Ils
due
ont été
diligence.
présentés.
They were presented at Congress before Mr. Zuckerberg, who decided against removing them. If you really have the intention of fighting against disinformation and being a responsible citizen, I have a hard time understanding that decision, Mr. Chan.
So you'll excuse me, sir, for not being up to date on all the things that were discussed at the hearing last week. But I would just say that we do stand with public health experts. We do rely on them to flag for us things that they believe are harmful misinformation. As you may know, we do partner with the Public Health Agency of Canada to ensure that we do have a good posture in Canada, that we do drive good information to Canadians. We've directed over 2 billion people directly to public health information around the world, and millions in Canada to the Public Health Agency of Canada. Dr. Tam will be engaging in a Facebook Live on Wednesday with us to speak directly with Canadians about getting good information about the vaccine. So we do want to do our part. I am also mindful, sir, the other piece is that Mr. Shields has mentioned there is a delicate striking of a balance between allowing people to say what they think and what they feel and ensuring that we keep our community safe. And so I guess in this case, I would humbly submit to you, sir, we're trying to strike that balance between you and Mr. Shields.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chan. Thank you, Mr. Champoux and Ms. McPherson will now have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had some quick questions for the witnesses on some of the online hate regulations. Mr. Chan, in your last appearance before the committee, you stated that Facebook supports legislation that sets standards to prohibit hateful content online and that the current self-regulation of platforms is not sustainable. Do you agree that the government's delay in introducing legislation is exacerbating the spread of hateful content online?
Oh, I really don't know, ma'am. I mean, first of all, we haven't seen a proposal, so I don't want to speculate what it may or may not include. But I can tell you that obviously at Facebook, we do have rules in our community standards about harmful content, and we are working hard every day to enforce against our community standards.
So to encourage platforms to act quickly to remove hateful content, do you think that the government should provide for sufficiently strong monetary and criminal penalties?
That, ma'am, I haven't seen any specific proposal, so I don't want to, as I've said, I think elsewhere, it probably is unwise to comment on something that hasn't been presented to anybody.
So maybe just from your own perspective, I guess. So even though you have, it makes sense for there to be strong monetary and criminal penalties if social media platforms don't take off hateful content in a timely manner.
Well, I mean, there are already criminal provisions under law, as you may know, in Canada. And so obviously the platform and Facebook and other internet companies, we obviously live with that framework.
So that I'm assuming that that's a yes, that you also agree that there would be a reason for us to be able to use judicial and financial penalties, I guess, to hold Facebook to account if they were not taking down hateful content in a timely manner.
I think we've indicated that, in fact, yes, if we aren't seen to be in good faith building the right systems to enforce against our standards, then absolutely we should be subject to some kind of penalty and held to account.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chan, and thank you, Ms. McPherson. We'll continue on with Mr. Shields for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, that would be Mr. Aitchison.
Désolé.
I'm sorry. You are correct. Mr. Aitchison, it's your turn. I'm sorry for my mistake.
No worries. Nobody could accuse you of being favoritist towards the Conservatives. It's a good thing. I'm going to start out by saying that part of this discussion, what I'm struggling with, of course, is that Facebook is a new technology, and much like we've been discussing in the Broadcasting Act, new technologies are overtaking old technologies. That said, I love my local newspaper. I'm actually working on a project right now where I'm doing a lot of research on old editions of the Huntsville Forester that are all online, which is just a treasure trove of information. And of course, we've talked a lot about Facebook being trying to moderate online. It is like a community square where people get to stand up and say what they want to say. I guess the big difference, of course, between Facebook and maybe a community newspaper is that I don't think Facebook actually produces much content. Can you speak to that? Does Facebook actually produce any content itself, or is it simply a platform for others?
Well, I mean, there may be some experiments that I am, personally not aware of, but I think that's correct, sir. The way you describe it, which is that we're a platform. Content is user generated for the vast majority, and then there is some percentage, perhaps less than 4%, which is page content. Page content meaning content that comes from pages such as, for example, your Facebook page, sir. And it could also come from a newspaper. It could also come from a university or the House of Commons or the Parliament of Canada. But yes, you're absolutely right that it is a platform that is really based on user-generated content.
So one of the problems is that we see too is that people we understand that people are just not interested in paying for information on the internet. I think it's one of the big problems that news outlets have. How much of a dramatic shift would it be in the Facebook model if there was a monthly fee or an annual fee to be a member of Facebook?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We have thought about it actually from time to time, and certainly that's been suggested to us by stakeholders. I think the challenge is if you think about this from our perspective, with over 2 billion users around the world, it would likely be the case that we would end up creating different classes of users, ones who could afford it and ones who couldn't, or ones who could afford it easily and ones who would have a very difficult time affording it. And that doesn't seem like the best way to build community, which is what we're trying to do in terms of our mission. Lots of people, if you talk to people in the global south, they actually use Facebook for many different reasons. Some of them economic, growing.
But so I'm going to cut you off quickly. Mm-hmm. You could have different rates in different parts of the world. They're like pharmaceutical companies charge different prices for their pharmacy for their drugs in different parts of the world based on the market. I wonder though. I mean, I think part of the problem we have here in Canada is that because it's free. And I think in part because everyone's trapped at home and bored and frustrated by COVID-19, it's a general, dumbing down of society because people post stupid things and then it spreads like wildfire. If it was actually a service that you had to pay, even a nominal fee, maybe it would cut down on that kind of stupidity.
Sir, that is a very good point. We've heard it from others, and I'm happy to make that point back internally after this meeting. But okay. Thank you for that. Yeah,
thanks. That's right. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Unless I have lots more time and I can, ramble on some more, but you probably don't want that. No, looks like.
Vous êtes en sordine, Monsieur le Président.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you.
Alain, you're muted.
On vous attend, Monsieur le Président.
We can't hear you, Mr. Chair. You're muted.
Oui, désolé, j'étais.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was checking the witness list. and I was on the phone, so I lost the end of what you were saying. We will now move on to Mr. Housefather for another 5-minute round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I believe I made my point in the last round. I could continue to ask questions that only Mr. Zuckerberg or people at other levels can answer. I won't keep doing that. But I want to end with the point that Mr. Zuckerberg is the CEO, the majority shareholder, the chairman of the board of a US company that operates in Canada. And the fact that he doesn't happen to be a Canadian citizen or isn't resident in Canada doesn't shield him from the obligation, in my view, to testify before this committee when we requested it. And I really strongly request that you convey that back, because for me, it entirely changed the way I was going to question Facebook today. So I'm going to go back to a question. My colleague, Mr.
Champoux, brought up moderators. And Mr. Chan, you said that you couldn't tell us if there were any Francophone moderators in Quebec or in Canada. But in Mr. Zuckerberg's testimony, we saw reports where he said that he would increase the number of Spanish-speaking moderators in the United States, not just Spanish-speaking moderators, but those who live in the United States. So why can you not tell us whether there are Francophone moderators in Canada?
Well, I mean, again, our approach is not to reveal where content moderators are. As you will know, Mr. Housefather, they are part of a 35,000 member strong safety and security team around the world. And we work hard to ensure the safety and security of our community.
I understand and I appreciate that, Mr. Chen, but your CEO before Congress committed to not establish Spanish-speaking moderators, but increase the number of Spanish-speaking moderators in the United States. So he disclosed that there were Spanish-speaking moderators in the United States. And so I don't understand how we cannot know if they're French-speaking moderators in Canada. We're not asking who they are or where they are. So I would request that you in writing get back to the committee if you are able to disclose that there are or are not French-speaking moderators in Canada. Let me move to another question. You had said that all of Facebook policies are published, and I appreciate that, but you have guidelines that you give to the content moderators that are not published. The Guardian on March 23rd, three moderators noted that it spelled out differentiations between protections for private and public individuals. Vécu une situation au Québec où plusieurs.
In Quebec, a number of different mayors said that they would not run in the next election because they've received threats over social media.
Given that people in Quebec now are not running for re-election because of social media, I'm a bit concerned that the guidelines seem to specify that private individuals cannot be targeted with calls for death on Facebook, but public figures simply cannot be purposefully exposed to such calls. Therefore, it would be interpreted that it is legitimate under Facebook's harassment policies to call for the death of a public figure, as long as the user does not tag them in the post. Are these reports about these policies accurate in terms of the guidelines being given to moderators?
I don't know about the specific guidelines because, again, you'll appreciate, sir, I haven't seen those specific guidelines. What I can tell you, though, is that our posture with respect to public figures and private citizens is consistent, I think, with the way the law has evolved in terms of the different thresholds that would pertain to a private citizen versus a public figure. I would also, so that's just sort of the reality of, I think, sort of how the law has evolved and how the courts have interpreted these thresholds for public figure versus private citizen. But I would definitely say that in all cases where there is a credible threat to an individual, whether public or private, we obviously work with law enforcement to make sure that we get to the bottom of it. We treat it very seriously.
And I understand that, but you know, if somebody posts, I plan to versus Anthony Housefather should be hanged, I'm not really sure I see the great distinction there in terms of the potential to persuade somebody who might have very bad intentions to go do something. And I really don't understand why a call for death against a public figure would not be something that would be in violation of Facebook policies, and that content moderators be instructed to take it down. So I would request, again, Mr. Chan, if you can, to consider whether you can deposit with the committee the guidelines that are provided to moderators that are referred to in the Guardian article. I'd like to then get to a BuzzFeed report on February 21st. BuzzFeed reported that they...
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. I must interrupt you. Everyone is working so well, and we're being so strict that we should be able to get through all 4 question rounds. Mr. Waugh.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chan, should government regulate internet? I asked that question to Ian Scott. What's happening today on Facebook, we have many former broadcasters doing shows right now, charging advertising dollars, and they're not actually got a broadcasting license, yet they have shows coast to coast in this country using your platform. They're not regulated at all. And so Mr. Scott, who was chair of the CRTC, said, this is one thing they're going to look, would need more money from the Treasury Board, the CRTC, if this is, going to happen. So just your thoughts on your platform right now actually being a broadcaster in almost every city in this country.
Well, I'm not aware of that, sir. I mean,
well, how could you not?
I have to tell you. I mean, I don't. That's not what I follow on Facebook. I'm not. But certainly, please don't misunderstand my reaction as being to discount what you're saying. I personally, that's just not my. It's not my jam, if you will. So I'm not aware. But obviously, it is definitely the case that Facebook allows for all sorts of people, big and small, to be able to live stream, to be able to communicate with whoever else they want on Facebook. That's the value of Facebook. That's why people come back to Facebook.
So who's going to regulate that? Who's going to regulate this? Because they're taking money from newspapers, they're taking money from traditional broadcasters. I would say hundreds of thousands of dollars are being taken by platforms like yours. They're using you as an avenue. And, you sit here and look every day, there's an hour show from here, there's 2 hour show from here with advertisers, and yet they're not regulated. Should they be regulated?
Well, Mr. Waugh, I think, I have to say, I think that is going back to what Mr. Shields was saying. I do believe if again, what you're describing, and I don't want to misunderstand what you're saying, but if you're describing is an individual going on Facebook to, live stream something, that is, I think, technically speaking, that is speech. And so we do want to be careful on our end to make sure that we are not imposing, certain conditions on people's speech that aren't in the area of harm and danger and security, which is what our community standards are for.
It's happening every day. I mean, there's sports shows, there's entertainment shows, and they're charging for advertising. I don't think they're paying your company for it. But it's just, we had the CRTC in on Friday, and all of a sudden, Mr. Scott says, we might be looking at controlling the internet because of what is going on. And then all of a sudden, his second question is, I need to go to the Treasury Board to look at this. So, as an opposition member, all of a sudden, how much do you need to control the internet?
I understand the sentiment, that Mr. Waugh. I mean, I would just say, look, from personal experience, I mean, Mark referred to the Digital News Innovation Challenge, which is really the first program we did back in 2017 to support news. There is a team there, one of the 5 companies that we helped incubate. It's called The Gist. It's a team of 3. At the time, it was a team of 3 young professionals who decided to create a news outlet for sports focused on sort of women it's women. It's like it's a feminist publisher focused on interpreting sports for women. They were from Toronto. They use platforms like Facebook, I suspect other platforms as well, to grow. They are doing remarkably well, 3 or 4 years on across North America.
Yeah.
And that was the power, I think, of the open internet. And I agree with you that I think if they're doing a lot of this on Facebook and other streaming platforms that are open to user-generated content, presumably that means they're in competition with others. But in some ways, I think it is a wonderful example to see in terms of innovation, in terms of effectively a small business finding success and being able to challenge incumbents online.
One question as my time's ending here. Did Facebook learn anything by shutting down for 3 days in Australia?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Waugh, and thank you very much, Mr. Chan. Thank you for your answers. I'll now give the floor to Ms. Ian.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Job today. And thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Chan, I want to start with you and focus in on hate speech, if I might, for a little bit. We have seen what has happened with anti-Asian hate. A lot of it was born on social media and ramped up because of that. It has been reported that per capita, there is more anti-Asian hate and incidents thereof per capita in Canada, in fact, than in the United States. So just wondering, with regards to Facebook and how you run things, whether anything has changed. Have you ramped up efforts to curb that kind of hate?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. I think our approach is uniform across the system, which is that discriminatory targets or derogatory language or discriminatory language targeted at specific groups, whether they be Asian or otherwise, are a violation of our community standards. And so we would enforce the same way across the system. I cannot, from my own personal experience working at Facebook, I can't say that we have seen an uptick on enforcement. Certainly nothing has been escalated to my desk or to my screen, but I obviously read with concern the same things you're reading in the news about the challenge that Asian Canadians are facing.
So, for example, if something were to be found, Mr. Chan, a post on Facebook that contained hate, what happens? Can you kind of walk us through that?
Sure. I mean, the way we enforce our systems is there's kind of two ways of doing it, to be honest. One is the automated system, which I think one of your colleagues mentioned, which is the sort of using artificial intelligence, really, some of the technology we've developed in Canada, machine learning, to go and find all these things. And so, in fact, I mean, I have some statistics here. In terms of hate speech, in the last quarter of 2020, our automated systems found over 97% of kind of hate speech directed at at groups automatically. So before any human has seen them or reported them. And so that's kind of where we're at. Now, at 97% is not 100%, so we still have a ways to go. But we're getting better every day, and so that's our posture. We think that so that's the way we do it right now. The other piece, though, is that because speech is important from a contextual standpoint, we have to be careful that on some of the gray zones for speech, that in fact it is an attack on a community and not actually something else, like, for example, spreading awareness about Asian racism, for example. And so we do need humans as well. And so part of that 35,000 person team that I've referred to are people who are going to be looking at the context and saying, well, this image was shared, or this video was shared, or this text was shared, but is the context of this to attack Asians, or is this to raise awareness about discrimination and racism? And so depending on that context, it does matter in terms of whether or not we would enforce or not, and take it down. And so it is really a kind of a parallel process that meets when we need to get more context, we have automated systems that go and find things automatically. And I think we're constantly improving, but we're at about 97% for the proactive identification. And then we do need humans to verify some of the more challenging ones where the speech is gray, we have to be sure of the context. And then in the most complicated cases, they get escalated to people like me, ma'am, and Rachel, where we will look at specific pieces of content emanating from Canada and have to consult with experts and think through whether or not we're going to be drawing the line in the right place.
Mr. Chen, thank you. I'm now going to share my time with my colleague, Ms. Debruzen. Ms. Debruzen, please go ahead.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, j'ai combien?
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
Il vous reste
30 seconds, Mr. Brusen.
I will probably get back to this then in the next round, but I wanted to speak a bit about free resources. You talk a lot about free access, say for the press to your network, and I'm curious and will ask more questions about who actually pays for that.
Malheureusement, Madame de Bruce.
Unfortunately, Mr. Brusen, there's hardly any time left, so the answer will have to come during the next round. Mr. Shampoo now has 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chan, you are the World Vice President of Facebook. What was Facebook's business figure in Canada for 2020?
Don't have that information. I also, as a
No, j'avoue.
I am quite surprised, Mr. Chan, given your title.
Malheureusement pour moi.
Unfortunately, 2.5 billion was the estimated amount for Canada. What would you say to that? Honestly, I'm not aware of that. I'm also not the World Vice President, unfortunately for me. I'm sorry, Global Director. The estimation is 2.5 billion yearly for Canada. You generate significant traffic on your pages when it comes to news, and this brings significant benefits to your platform as well. That's no secret. With that said, you just announced 8 million over 3 years into Canadian journalism, 2.7 million per year on average, compared to the revenue that I just said.
Maybe I'll ask my colleague Mark to explain a bit more afterwards, but I would just point out that the $8 million is for the entire ecosystem to build capacity for local news and to build capacity for underrepresented voices. That is not at all.
Il existe déjà des.
There already are voices speaking for those communities. Those platforms already exist. What they're looking for is fairness for sharing advertising income. News announcers know that it's easier to use Facebook. Don't you think that written media should go back and revise the model?
Well, again, I would just say that it is, again, a common misunderstanding. But when, pour être clair,
to be clear, I'm sorry. I must tell the truth. When a publisher shares a link on Facebook, for example, my mother-in-law who lives in Quebec City, if she sees a link in her newsfeed and she clicks on the link, she is taken directly to the publisher's website, and the publisher generates income, not us.
Je vais manquer de temps.
I won't have enough time to continue going into this, but I think you know that's false. Facebook and Google and other social media are earning much more money than news media. Thank you. Ms. McPherson.
Mr. Chair, I think I might have missed it, but did you call me? Okay.
Oui.
Yes.
I'll start. I think the translation was just having a little bit of trouble keeping up. So I would like to actually follow up on some of the comments that my colleague, Mr. Shampoo, has just brought up. So, knowing that we are we are hearing announcements of an $8 million contribution to Canadian media or Canadian broadcasting, and of course that it was made public the weekend, the day before you were to come before this committee. It's great to see this contribution to local media, but obviously it's a very small amount of money compared to, as Mr. Shampoo pointed out, to the revenue that is collected through Facebook, the amount of money that Facebook makes in Canada. And it also seems to me that it is not the right way to do this, that clearly this is not the right way to solve this media crisis. So instead of, choosing for you or the big web giants to choose how to interact, it seems to me that the role of government is to introduce legislation like Australia did that would in fact force you to pay your fair share instead of you creating the rules that favor you. So wouldn't you agree that rather than sort of be looking for handouts from Facebook, on one-offs, doesn't it make more sense to actually have legislation in place that holds you to account on that?
Well, ma'am, again, as I indicated earlier, and others have said this too from Facebook, I think that the challenge with the Australian model is that it didn't reflect the realities of how the internet works. And so once again, asking or requiring that Facebook pay for the links shared onto Facebook, where we don't have a say in that, and we aren't able to control the volume, means we don't control the price. It fundamentally breaks the premise of how a free and open internet works, and that's the challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't care about the future of news. That doesn't mean that we don't want to invest in news, and so we have made a commitment of $8 million, but I've also indicated in certain to the media earlier that we've also are going to look in 2021 to commercial deals with publishers in a way that makes sense. And perhaps I'll turn it over to my colleague Mark, who can elaborate a bit.
Chen. Merci, Monsieur Chen.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Now 5 minutes go to Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Just following up a little bit, being the old guy I am, I remember being in London, Hyde Park on Speaker's Corner, where you can find all sorts of interesting characters saying whatever they want. That's sort of the old form of social media today. So, Mr. Chan, as governments react, as you hear the concerns here, governments are following along in a sense where they have a concern. So when I brought up censorship before, and has been referred to other people in mechanisms, we have a judicial system that interprets our hate speech. It's a very public and open forum.
Yes, sir.
But what you're doing is behind closed doors. It's not public, and you're providing a policy and implementation of rules that you develop, and it's not in a public forum. What that leaves government in a position where they then will begin to draft legislation to control and make it public what you do. So you've got a choice. You can become more public and open about your policies of you develop for censorship, or you're going to face government regulation. You don't like government regulation. Australian model doesn't work for anybody because the actual authors don't get any money out of it. So it's not a solution. You just pay and publishers get money. So what are you going to do?
Well, sir, that's a very astute point, and I thank you for raising it. I think that's, in fact, so we agree with you, and we've heard the same criticism elsewhere, which is that Facebook is creating these rules, and Facebook is deciding what stays up and what stays down. And so, to your point, sir, the only entity, as you know, in a liberal democracy that has the legitimacy to make these rules is Parliament, which is in fact why, and I would disagree with you, sir, respectfully just a little bit, which is why we welcome regulation. And so when it comes to speech, you're right. We've been doing this for as long as Facebook has existed. And the reason why we're kind of in the middle of it all is because for any decision that we take about content, There will be people who say we took down too much, and then there will be people who say we left up or that we didn't take down enough. And so in order to do this in a way that's satisfying to a democracy is very much to have Parliament rule and have Parliament draw those lines. And so obviously we've heard from representatives of the government that they will be pursuing this. Presumably this committee will be studying it and providing input. And we look forward to working collaboratively with you to share whatever experience and knowledge that we've had on this question that might be useful to the committee's deliberations.
Thank you. And that maybe get to be very interesting and not a model that ends up being what you would prefer as we bring this into the open. Maybe you do prefer that, but you have a lot of people employed. You have a lot of algorithms working at specific words. This is going to be a challenge for you as you work with us.
I understand that, sir, but thank you for that, and we agree. Now, if I may say one other thing, sir, if I may, I would say obviously we are trying to be transparent. That's why we publish all of our community standards. We also engage with experts around the world, including in Canada, as we refine our policies, we do engage with the experts in Canada, the foremost experts in Canada, if I may say, on things like hate speech, on things like human rights and constitutionality, on freedom of expression, on discrimination.
Right, but you have no mechanism like a judicial system that you can appeal it, you can challenge it in a public sector. Yours is all behind the screen.
Well, we do have an appeals mechanism. Maybe I'll refer to Rachel, who might be able to talk a bit about our new final board of appeal.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mr. Shields. So I think where some of the issues come is in our interpretation of the community standards. So the community standards are the rules, but not everyone agrees with how those rules are enforced. And we totally understand that. You're right. Those decisions and those interpretations are made behind closed doors. And so what we did is set up the Facebook Oversight Board very recently. And that board is entirely independent of the company. And they are now a body to which users can appeal to say, hey, I don't agree with the decision Facebook has made around taking down my content. I'd like the board to look into it and review it. They are now starting those cases, and they do not agree with Facebook's decisions in all of them for sure. So there is now this judicial body, if you will, overseeing those decisions around removal.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Curran and Mr. Shields, rather. Mr. Housefather.
Je crois que c'est Madame.
I believe it's Ms. De Bruzen, Mr. Chair. Oh, Ms. De Bruzen, my apologies. No worries, thank you.
To pick up where I left off, which was the question, you've spoken a lot today about how there's like a free platform provided to companies like the Village Media from which they make money. But it seems to me a bit surprising that Facebook is doing this just out of the goodness of their heart to provide a free resource or platform to these news media companies. So perhaps can you help me better understand, how does that get monetized? If people are going, for example, to the Village Media, which you've poked out, does that not boost them being on Facebook elsewhere, or the data collection behind it for you?
No, ma'am. I mean, again, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question so I can answer it appropriately. But I don't think.
Let me make it very clear then, so we know that we know it. My question is it truly a free resource? Let's start with that. Are you saying that in no way whatsoever does Facebook collect any data or receive any increase in funding through driving to other resources when you have companies like Village Media posting links onto your platform?
Oh, I see. Well, no, I mean, ma'am, obviously Facebook is an ads platform. And so it is a platform whereby advertisers who want to reach a certain audience will say, well, maybe I'll advertise here and there, and maybe I'll advertise on Facebook because I want to reach a certain audience. And that's how Facebook makes money.
But just because you keep on placing it as free, and this part just seems to be a bit surprising to me that Facebook is providing an entirely free resource for our news media. Seems to be, if I understand correctly, what you're saying. So I'm just trying to understand, do you not collect any data, or does it not keep people going back to Facebook more by having these links?
Well, I mean, there's lots of questions there, ma'am. I mean, let me try to unpack them a bit. So we do not make money off of links being shared onto Facebook. And we do make money because people are there. And advertisers say, oh, well, I want to reach them. Much like, for example, the political parties represented here. Presumably, political parties are using Facebook because they want to reach Canadians. And so some of that might be by posting things organically, sharing things, just like a publisher might share a link. But some of it might be also advertising. And so if you choose to advertise to people on Facebook, then obviously we are going to be the beneficiaries of it from a revenue standpoint.
Why don't I jump in? Because one of the things, if I look at the Canadian Media Concentration Research Project, if I understand correctly, their argument
from Dwayne Winsek, Professor Winsek from Carleton.
Yes, about the Australia model, they actually suggest that the better response is to break the data surveillance model with stronger data protection rather than attaching something to links. So what do you have to say about that? Isn't it all about the data?
But no, I don't think so. I mean, in the sense of this takes us into a different regulatory area, but we are for strong privacy regulation. We're also for strong data portability rules. And so this idea that, what that would mean is that if the government in its wisdom, or if Parliament in its wisdom, wish to create data portability rules that allow it to be easier to transfer information from one platform to another, we would support that. I mean, as long as certain privacy conditions are respected. In fact, we have built tools that allow for the transfer of information between the various.
I just have a few minutes because I'm not really talking about it. It's just that your advertising dollars are boosted by the fact that you collect data, is it not? Like the fact that you have data about who is on Facebook is how you build your ad platform, is it not?
I think the value of Facebook to advertisers, big and small, is that they're able to reach audiences on Facebook. So, for example, if you wanted to reach the community in your riding, ma'am, you can do that on Facebook.
But the fact that you know who is in my riding or who is anywhere else is based on the data that you collect, is it not?
It's based on the data of people who are on Facebook who have chosen to share that. Yes. But I would say, ma'am, though, I mean, that is, advertising is so I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet. And of course, when you think about how any other ad surface works, also a bit like that. It's kind of saying, well, listen, if you put an ad in a TV
fair,
show.
Though, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Chan, and I'm sorry, but I just don't have much time.
Sure,
and the question, though, is that the actual difference between the former system.
Mr. Bruson, there's no time left. I'm sorry. Perhaps Mr. Chan will be able to answer at some other time. I will now give the floor to Mr. Aitchison.
My apologies. I actually didn't think it was going to come around to me again, so I turned my microphone off. I actually kind of want to continue on what I was talking about earlier about the concept of a fee for membership. I know that the model right now is based on lots and lots and lots of users, and then the advertising revenue that's generated from people, accessing as many people as humanly possible. So I wonder if you actually charged a membership fee, it would actually reduce potentially the number of eyes that might be on a particular ad and therefore affect ad revenue. Is that a fair statement?
No, I think we want to give as well. An internet platform is only as valuable as it is to people who want to connect with as many people as possible. And so that's really the big development in the last little while. This is ability for anybody in any place of the world to be able to talk to anybody else. And so the value, if I may say, the value of Facebook to people and why there are 24 million Canadians on Facebook is precisely the fact that they're able to go somewhere and be able to reach out to all these different people that they may or may not even know already. And so we think that ability should be free to people. But I think, as Madame de Bruzen is pointing out, it obviously we have to be able to. It costs billions and billions. Well, as you can see from our expenses, it costs billions and billions of dollars to be able to offer this to people that they value. And so the way we are currently being able to pay for that and succeed as a business is through advertising.
Okay, and I guess I'm not entirely sure I understand what was described at the very beginning of the meeting in terms of the voluntary relationship with local media. Could you get into that a little bit more, please?
Sure. My toddler is walking around outside talking to herself, so I'm going to defer to Mark Dinsdale.
That would probably add an adorable element to your testimony. I think you should just let her do her thing.
I really should. I'll come back later, but perhaps Mark, he's really the expert. He talks to publishers all the time, so perhaps Mark, you could provide some insight.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Atchison. What we're seeking to do this year is enter into commercial agreements with news publishers that would see them set up basically a service that would allow their publishing system, their publishing platform, to send links of articles that they publish on their websites directly to our back end. This is a difference, as you've heard, from the way that publishers currently share links to Facebook, which is through their page, which then shows up in people's feeds. So instead of publishers sharing links in that way, we'd like to take the links delivered through this service and put them in more places on Facebook in front of more audiences in the context of places where news context is important. So for example, we have a COVID-19 information center that has government information, stats, et cetera, about the COVID crisis. If we could take links from trusted news sources and put that kind of editorial context, local, national, et cetera, within that kind of information center, that will lead to people being more informed about the pandemic. And when people click on those links, will drive people back to the publisher directly as well. So the goal is to provide both a broader selection of links from trusted Canadian partners and also to find essentially a new way in which we can support the industry. The value that we see to publishers is essentially in this agreement that would see them provision and maintain this service, and also the benefit of driving more people back to read the full text of the articles on these important questions.
So could this potentially be the first step in a more structured Facebook, as opposed to just a free-for-all of people sharing whatever inane idea they have?
Well, Mark, I'm happy to answer that one. I mean, I think so. We do have in Canada. So that's a very good question, sir. A very astute question. We do have, and these are, to be clear, I think I don't know if Mark mentioned it, but these are actually new, very new things. Both surfaces we're talking about, these information centers, are new in Canada since COVID. We have a COVID-19 information center and we have a climate science information center, and both of these are new, and we are trying to connect Canadians with scientific information. And so in the COVID case, we're kind of trying to connect Canadians directly with information from the Public Health Agency of Canada. And so...
Merci, Monsieur Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. I will now give the floor to Mr. Housefather. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Circle back to a topic that was brought up by a number of my colleagues. I'm slightly astounded to hear that you cannot tell us what the ad revenues were in Canada last quarter or last annual period. I mean, I was an executive of a tech company. I could have told you what our annual revenues were, what our quarterly revenues were. I could have broken it down by market segment. I could have broken it down by country in major countries. Are you really seriously telling us, Mr. Chan, that you do not know what Facebook's quarterly revenues were for Q4 2020 in Canada for advertising?
Sir, I think what I'm trying to say is that, we don't, well, first of all, we don't break these out publicly.
I'm sorry, but I see here Facebook's revenue in Q4 2020 broken down by North America, so Canada and the United States, is $13.2 billion in ad revenue. I see it published.
Well, so again, we don't break it out by country, as you know, in these public documents.
But you've broken it by North America. You've basically put Canada together with the United States and said it's $13.2 billion. You're the senior executive in Canada, and you don't know what percentage that comes from. What is Canada?
Sir, if the Canada Revenue Agency wishes to make it the case that all of these companies report to its local revenue, we will be happy to comply.
You're a public company. You're governed by SEC rules. You're governed by NASDAQ rules.
That's correct.
You make your revenues public. The only reason we don't have Canadian revenues is because you've chosen to consolidate them with the United States revenues, correct?
No, sir. It's because of the rules that your system, right, the system of parliament and the system of government, has decided to require.
But you are a U.S. public company listed on NASDAQ. NASDAQ has requirements. The SEC has requirements of public disclosure of financials. You've disclosed financials. You've simply disclosed them bundling Canada with the United States on a consolidated basis. So all the more reason then that Mr. Zuckerberg, who is trying to say that he's an American citizen and shouldn't come here, well, Canada and the United States are lumped together in the way you report revenues. So the only way we don't have access to Canadian revenues on their own is because because Facebook has chosen to consolidate them with your U.S. revenues.
Sir, I'm glad you mentioned Microsoft, because I think if you asked a question of Microsoft and Google and Twitter and TikTok, and now that Reddit will be coming to Canada, you can ask Reddit. I suspect that the answer will be the same, and it's not because we wish. And
so is your answer that? Mr. Chan, is your answer that you don't know or that you can't tell me because they're confidential? Two different issues.
They're both.
You don't know and they're confidential.
That's right. That's right. Sir, my job, as you know, and I know you know this because we've had private conversations with you, the job of Rachel Curran and myself is to work to deal with these very complex policy issues. We are not here to sell advertising to you. We're not here to for profitability reasons. We're here to ensure that we have the right policy frames, both internally at Facebook, but also for public policy.
Of course, but on the issue that we're talking about, the issue of the news media, which was the primary reason that we called people here today. Right? The revenues of Facebook generated in Canada through advertising are a very, very important factor in the policy decisions the government of Canada should be taking.
I see. So sir, look, I think we can just solve this by just being very clear about our posture about taxes, if that's what your question is. If the government of Canada and if the Parliament of Canada, in its wisdom, wished to take more revenue from a US-based company and give it to some other purpose, the simplest and most effective way to do that is to tax these companies, have it go into the consolidated revenue fund, and then make a separate funding decision about what the government and Parliament would like to fund, as you do in an annual budget every year. So I hear you, and I think we hear you, that people say, well, you know what, we think that these companies are doing well, and we should tax them more. And so again, I just think the number is not really the principle is more important, I guess. And so what I'm saying to you, sir, because I want to give you some satisfaction in terms of getting at the answer you want, is if you believe that this is the right frame.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. I must stop you there and give the floor to Mr. Champoux. Thank you. I think that line of questioning is very just interesting by Mr. Housefather. Mr. Chan was explaining to us how Canadian public finances should be managed, but we will get to an answer, Mr. Chan, to determine how companies such as Facebook contribute fairly to the systems that they benefit from significantly. Mr. Chan, we are finalizing our report on Bill C-10, as you know. And in many of the recommendations that will be put forward will be to include social media, which is not currently covered by C-10. Of course, I expect for social media to oppose this, but if that were the case, if Facebook and other social media became subjected to regulation under the Broadcasting Act in Canada, how would you adapt? How would you react to events such as the one in Christchurch that I brought up earlier? How would you ensure that those 17 minutes of horror that were live streamed would no longer be accessible?
Well, sir, if I understand the question correctly, was talking about, to be honest, which is that we're talking about user-generated content, and the frameworks will be different. And so a framework about what people can and cannot say is a different framework than I believe what's currently before the committee.
Unfortunately, I only have 2 minutes, 30 seconds in this question round. Facebook's algorithm, according to Jean-Hugues Roy, the researcher, was dependable. In a few seconds, that live stream could have been stopped. Inaudible for the interpreter. Is it not a publishing choice by Facebook to stop broadcasting shocking imagery in certain contexts when there's no regulation in place? No, absolutely not. Professor Roy is misinformed. That is not the case. I'm going to hurry up and let him know that that's the case.
But I have to tell you that the way it is just not. There is
Monsieur Chan, je suis obligé de vous interrompre, but
Mr. Chan, I must interrupt you. Perhaps Ms. McPherson will continue on the subject, but it's her turn now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually wanted to follow up on some of the questions that Mr. Housefather was asking. So Mr. Chan, you've said that you neither know nor would be willing to make public the Canadian revenues. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share those numbers, to find those numbers, to get that information and share those numbers with this committee, if that would be possible.
Well, ma'am, I think we can do one better than that. I'm pleased to share with the committee that we are working hard to change our structure at Facebook in Canada so that the entity seller model, we are doing this unilaterally on our own. No other company, to my knowledge, on the internet space is doing that. What that will mean is that we will register with the CRA. And when we do that, we will not just for 2020, we will on a go-forward basis report our revenue to the CRA sort of in perpetuity. And we will be doing that, I hope, in the coming months. There's some technical work that needs to be done to be able to do that. But that is our commitment, because I think we do hear from you, ma'am, and from Mr. Housefather and others that what people want is transparency. And so regardless, and again, I want to be very clear about this though, regardless of what the rules are in Canada, we will unilaterally make this available. And we are in the process of making that, of undertaking that technical work to get it done.
That's great, and you expect that to happen in the next couple months. That's good to hear.
That's right.
I do want to actually ask a question as well about some of the online violence. I know that I'm following up on some questions that others have asked. As you know, Facebook did take down the Proud Boys Facebook page in mid-January after my leader stood up in the House and asked for for the government to act on declaring Proud Boys a terrorist organization. But it was recently reported that hundreds of other militia pages are still operating openly on Facebook, including over 140 that have the word militia in the title. So news reports even suggest that Facebook creates such pages automatically. So I'm just wondering how you can say that you're doing your very best to reduce these incitements to violence when there are pages being created that actually will incite that violence.
Well, thank you for the question, ma'am. First of all, I want to commend your and racism. That is obviously something
Désolé,
that,
Monsieur Chan, je suis désolé de vous interrompre.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chan. I'm sure we all would have wanted to hear the answer, but I will now pass the floor to Mr. Waugh.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. A month ago, Facebook blocked its Australian users from sharing the news articles. Have you learned anything from alienating people in Australia when you blocked it for 3 days and then you made the agreement? Has your company learned anything from that last month in Australia?
Oh,
because yeah,
yes,
go ahead.
sir. Well, Mr. Warlock, I just want to sort of I want to characterize it the way I think, you know, the way it has been, which is that the exiting the news market, it was the only response to a proposal that didn't respect the realities of how the internet works. Now, I would say that in Canada, you know, we've seen examples of this. So, for example, if you look at C-76, which was the Elections Modernization Act from the previous parliament, we were very early supporters of that, and we supported it throughout its kind of legislative process, and we were the first to comply and build very robust systems to ensure that we do our part to ensure a free and fair election. As you may recall, there were other platforms who had a different posture, including some who exited the market for political ads. Yep. And so I would just say that I would hope for your understanding in this regard, in the sense that, you know, companies obviously are going to have to look internally to see whether or not they can meet the requirements set by authorities. Usually, when laws are fact-based, we're able to do that, right? As we did with C-76. I think where a law kind of disregards the basic premises of the internet and how it works, it obviously makes it very challenging. And so in the end, we did exit the market. It is also the case that the revised and amended law in Australia further clarifies to state that exiting the news market is a legitimate outcome for a process that if a company deems it to be too high a regulatory burden.
So that could happen here in Canada then?
Again, as I've said elsewhere, that is not something that Mark or I or Rachel are working towards. We're working towards, again, I take it back to my opening statement, we're working very hard and collaboratively with news publishers every day. I think we've talked about the Winnipeg Free Press, we've talked about the Globe and Mail, we've talked about Village Media. So publishers,
but some will be left
small,
out, right? Some will be left out.
Well, Mr. Waugh, I think our concern actually with Australia was very much that the framework it appeared, was going to help only the big media conglomerates.
Rupert Murdoch, right? His empire over there. He was the one that got the agreement going.
Well, I defer to your judgment on that, sir. But we're very much concerned with a framework that wouldn't allow us to support local news publishers, because we do think that while the future of news will involve all sorts of players, big and small, we are obviously sensitive to the fact that there are new models emerging. And that these independent small news publishers need to be supported. I think you've seen some of the programs we've announced are designed to address exactly that point. And we're also pleased that in Australia, the amended code allows us to now enter into agreements with small publishers, and allows us to pursue some of those ends.
Well, from France to Australia, who got the better deal?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, France, didn't you have an agreement also with news media in France? You know, both countries were France and of course Australia. You've made a few, as you said, a few agreements with their news media there. How about France? How can you compare the two? And how should Canadians compare to France and Australia when this does get rectified in this country?
I don't. So I don't. I mean, I think maybe Mark, you're closer to this than I am. I don't know if you have a thought on that.
I mean, I would comment that the the principle, no matter where it is the same in terms of the mechanisms that we're seeking and the ways in which we can support media. And that is what we're going to continue to do in Creative Ways in Canada. It does point to each jurisdiction is very different. And so when we hear of a made in Canada solution, we completely echo that because nothing is necessarily transportable in that way or comparable in that way.
Good, thanks. That's it for me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. The last person to take the floor, I just want to make sure, I have Mr. Housefather on my list who has the honor for the last 5-minute turn. Thank you, Chair.
Chen, when you last appeared before the committee on January the 29th, I asked you if Facebook controls what is in my news feed. You replied, no, sir, and said I can only see content from pages I positively connect to. There was a BuzzFeed article on February 21st, 2021 that spoke of a Facebook feature called In-Feed Recommendations that is designed to insert posts into users' feeds from accounts they do not follow, and that Facebook users had complained they were seeing posts from conservative personalities like Ben Shapiro in their newsfeed, even though they had never engaged with that type of content. Does the in-feed recommendations feature actually exist? And if so, isn't that different from what you told me in January?
Well, this is a recommendation engine. We're very public about it. We've had a post about this for some time now, so we can send that to you as well, sir, so you can read up on how that works.
Okay, I'm interested to know. Can I also ask, when you guys are obviously are aware of the moonshot redirection method of users that they're using with Google, where they redirect users who conduct searches to find harmful material to ads that you would click on to take them to positive alternative content. Does Facebook use any such technology either with Moonshot or with anyone else?
Yes, we do. So right now, if you were to search on Facebook or Instagram about, and I know you've spoken with Rachel about this as well, but about the Holocaust, if you were to search for child exploitation, if you were to search for COVID, in all those cases, we do redirect. And for the COVID one, most importantly, we redirect to the Public Health Agency of Canada, and that's why we have this partnership with them.
Which is excellent, and I praised you for that the last time, and I've been tough on you today, but there's some things that you do that are very good, and I want to also commend you for that, and I want to specifically commend Ms. Curran for her openness in chatting with me through stuff. In terms of the redirection, though, you're aware of the report that Moonshot had erroneously redirected people searching for far right content to an anarchist in a joint project in the United States done with the Anti-Defamation League. How do you guys make sure that when using those third-party providers, that isn't happening? Is it audited by anybody?
Oh well, we partner directly with the organization, and so so that's why we need to be absolutely clear. So, for example, during an election, we might partner with Elections Canada, as we have in the last 2 federal elections, to redirect directly back to the URL that Elections Canada has provided. And if I may say, sir, that's also why you have a public policy team in Canada, is to make sure that we are able to work collaboratively to make sure we get the right information to Canadians.
Yeah, I don't want to diminish the role of the public policy team in Canada with respect to certain issues. That's incredibly important, and you guys do great work. And I want to, again, commend Facebook for what you did in the last U.S. election. In the last U.S. election, it should be $1 million for election integrity. Facebook created an election information center that was excellent, that caused millions of people to register to vote, that found poll workers, and Facebook invested an enormous amount of money to protect the election integrity in the United States. Given that the population of Canada is 1/10 that of the United States, can you confirm that Facebook will be willing to spend 1/10 in Canada of what you spent in the United States to protect our election integrity in the next election?
That is a good question. I would submit to you that, again, we have a global framework for these things. We actually apply the same infrastructure around the world. So we, as you know, sir, I think well, don't take my word for it. I think media and academics and the government itself has said that there was no material interference in the last election. That was very good to see. We on the team, Rachel and I and others, are building out the team for the next election whenever that may come. And you have our assurances that we will do all that we need to do to protect it on our platform.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chan. We would like to thank you and your whole team and for the efforts that you will make in Canada for the next election. I would like to thank our 3 witnesses who spent a good 2 hours with us, Mr. Chan, Mr. Dinsdale, and Ms. Curran. Thank you sincerely for being with us today. We managed to get through the entirety of 4 question rounds. I thank all of my colleagues for respecting the time allocations for questions. And since this is my first meeting, Mr. Champoux, I'd just like to finish my thank yous, Mr. Champoux. I'd like to thank Ms. Bellemare, the clerk, and her whole team who helped me to prepare for the meeting with all of the documents and information. I'd like to thank the analysts and naturally the interpreters for their very rigorous work, the technicians, and of course, my colleagues. Thank you, everyone. Before the end of the meeting, I'll give the floor to Mr. Champoux. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses. I think it would have been very disappointing if we didn't take advantage, Mr. Chair, of your first meeting as chair, if we didn't take advantage to debate some motions today. I want to give you the full experience, you see. Dear colleagues, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned 2 witnesses that I put on notice. Mr. Champoux, just one moment. Our witnesses are here. Unless the clerk tells me otherwise, I think we can thank them and allow them to disconnect. So thank you to our 3 witnesses. Once again, you may disconnect. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Mr. Champoux, you know how much I hate meetings running overtime, but since your only wish was to help me enjoy a full experience as chair of the meeting, I appreciate you tabling 1 or 2 of the motions. I'm not sure how many. Well, it will be easy because at least 3 weeks ago, I already put them on notice. And colleagues had an opportunity to let me know if they had any problems. Here is the first motion. They're also in the digital binder. That the text of any substantive motion or any motion in amendment of a substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion. I will also read you the second motion, Mr. Chair, if I may. That the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advises the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. I would like to tell you that these are the same motions that were also presented at other committees and have been discussed by our whips and have also been submitted to the chief clerk. So I'm not an expert on procedures, but the clerk is connected to the meeting in case I need her help. I think we'll go 1 by 1 for the motions because there could be an amendment to one. So we'll go with the first motion by Mr. Champoux. I'll read it again to make sure there's no ambiguity, and I hope the interpretation will be fine. Otherwise, I can read it again in English, and then Ms. de Bruzen will have the floor. So the first motion tabled by Mr. Champoux today that had been put on notice the 1st of March. So it reads that the text of any substantive motion or any motion in amendment of a substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Ms. de Bruzen.
I guess my question for this one is that motions can be brought from the floor in the course of proceedings and in fact have. So does this motion not actually have the impact of blocking motions from the floor going forward, because you would have to have it in writing and translated and circulated to be able to have such motions.
Merci, Madame de Brousson.
Thank you, Mr. Brusen. Are there other comments?
Monsieur Champoux.
Mr. Champoux, would you perhaps like to try to respond to Mr. Brusen's comment? Well, honestly, I think that the motions tabled without notice can be discussed, but we're getting ready to, or before we vote, rather, I think we can have a discussion before any vote takes place. And I think that these motions were both translated in both official languages, and this would not prevent us from discussing motions. Would anyone else like to comment? Mr. Waugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, on the first motion, we would like to amend to add members' offices, and that would come after the federal department. So that would be an amendment that on our side we'd like to add if possible.
Oui, donc la greffière voudrait.
The clerk would like to intervene. Go ahead, Ms. Belmore.
I'm sorry, Mr. Waugh. I'm just looking for the wording where it says federal offices. I think perhaps you might not be looking at the right motion, sir. I can redistribute Mr. Champoux's motion if that would be helpful for everyone.
That would help if you could. I was just looking at the first motion, and is it this one, that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, and then we would like to add members' offices, if possible. Is that the first motion that we're dealing with here?
Non, c'est pas ça.
No, it's not that one.
Pendant que la greffière, je comprends.
Ms. Clerk, did I understand that you're going to send to all of our P9s the exact wording? I can read it. I'll try it in English if you don't mind.
That's the text of any substantive motion or any motion in amendment of all substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate of such a motion. Vous devriez avoir reçu.
You should have received the motion, the version in French and English, at your P9 accounts. In the meantime, if I may, Mr. Waugh, I will give the floor to Mr. Housefather, and then I'll come back to you for your amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Actually, put up my hand to try to clarify for my friend Kevin. The motion that he was seeking to amend was already adopted by this committee. We adopted it like a month ago. So the motion that is now before there's two motions that Mr. Champoux will put forward today. The second one I think is absolutely fine and has been adopted at other committees. The one he's now putting forward has been rejected at all the other committees I've been at because of the feeling that it would stop the flow of amendments being put forward, the ability, the interpreters do this work, they translate it, and it puts the clerk in the very impossible position of having to translate something, be responsible for the translation, and send it out to members when something comes up at the meeting, which is an impossibility for the clerk. So it was rejected at other committees because it would make it very, very difficult to send something out in writing that came up at a meeting without somebody officially translating it. So that's why it hasn't flown at other committees. But I understand the reason for it, but I don't think, avec tout le respect que j'en ai pour Monsieur.
With all due respect for Mr. Champoux, I don't believe that this motion will work because it takes so much time between the time the motion is tabled and the translation time that it will take, and then to distribute that translation to all members. I'm not sure who's responsible for that translation. But also, secondly, there's a risk of having an inadequate translation. So I will be opposed to this motion, but I understand why you tabled it. Thank you.
Merci.
Okay, thank you. Now I think everyone has received the motion at your emails. So before I give the floor to Mr. Champoux, I'd like to come back to Mr. Kevin Waugh, who had an amendment. Is it still necessary? I'd like to clarify.
It's not. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ça fait plaisir.
My pleasure. Mr. Champoux, you have the floor. I do perfectly understand the concern Mr. Housefather raised. I can make a proposal, perhaps. That might be a good way to find a compromise. I could take away the amendment segment of the motion, but I think the rest of it is important. It goes along with the same logic as the motion that we passed a month ago together to ensure the quality of translation of documents. There are nuances in motions. That's why I'm open to debate and to amending motions before passing them. I would like to hear Mr. Housefather.
Si vous permettez. Oui, merci, Monsieur Champoux.
Yes, I'm not sure if the clerk can confirm for us, but if we take away what you say, it would say that the text of any substantive motion, and then we take away the next part, be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion. I think that's already the case. I don't think we'd be able to receive a motion in just one language without it being sent to everyone in both official languages. So I don't know if it would be worthwhile, if I've understood correctly. So if we take away or any motion in amendment of a substantive motion, as you suggested, Mr. Champoux, I think that it becomes redundant. I've never seen anyone table a motion without that already being the case in my 5 years at Parliament. Madam Clerk, would you be able to confirm that? Am I perhaps mistaken?
Oui.
I just want to rephrase that. Could anyone table a motion, a substantive motion, in one official language without sending it to everyone in both official languages? In committee business, that would be fine to table a motion without notice and without having it in both official languages. You always have the right to do that in committee business without giving notice. And the interpreters would translate it in that case. So I'm sorry about that. That was my mistake. That's a good news. That means people are very careful in general to provide translation. Mr. Champoux, yes, I was going to specify that myself, actually. My expectations that I propose would that the motion be translated in both official languages. It can be done by the interpreters in the room. We wouldn't have to send it in writing to a translation team. So it can be done quite quickly. Mr. Champoux, are you therefore proposing to amend your own motion and then we can perhaps vote on it? Yes, if everyone is satisfied. But we could also debate my amendment if committee members wish to adopt this motion, including the amendment. Regarding the amendment, this might be broadcast on Infoman. So the motion would be as follows, that the text of any substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion. So Mr. Champoux is amending his own motion. I don't know if anyone would like to comment, apart from the clerk who is indicating to me. Go ahead, Madam Clerk. I'm sorry, Mr. Champoux is not supposed to amend his own motion. It should be amended by someone else. If there's anyone who would like to propose that amendment, okay. Mr. Housefather, are you raising your hand to propose to amend Mr. Champoux' amendment? Yes, Mr. Chair, actually, I had another solution. I was going to say what the clerk was saying, that Mr. Champoux unfortunately cannot propose the amendment. And we don't have a copy in English because he made his amendment only in French. But at other committees, Mr. Chair, when MPs wanted to amend their own motion, the chair asked for the committee's unanimous consent to allow the MP to withdraw their original motion and to retable their motion with the amendment, and that always worked at other committees. So with your permission, Mr. Chair, I suggest for Mr. Champoux to be allowed to withdraw his original motion and to be able to retable it with the amendment, if that's fine by you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that sounds very logical. I just need to know if there's unanimous consent for us to allow Mr. Champoux to amend his own motion regarding the amendment of a substantive motion. Do we have unanimous consent? Raise your hand if you agree. So I do not have unanimous consent, unfortunately, Mr. Champoux. Would anyone else like to intervene and make a comment on the original motion? If there are none, we will move on to a vote. No comments. So I'll check my list to make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Actually, I believe it is the clerk who names everyone for the vote, so I'll turn off my mic and turn it over to you.
Excellent. Can I confirm what we're voting on? Are we voting on the motion as amended, or are we voting on the motion as proposed? On the motion as proposed by Mr. Champoux?
As proposed. As proposed without amendment. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to read it again just to ensure that we are all voting on the same item. Que le texte de...
That the text of any substantive motion or any motion and amendment of a substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion.
This is what we're voting on? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for clarifying, everyone. I just want to make sure that I'm recording this correctly as a decision of the committee. Okay, so then I will proceed on the division. Madame Bessette?
No.
Ms. DeBruson?
No.
Mr. Housefather?
Sorry, no.
Ms. Ian?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
I vote against the motion.
Mr. Aitchison? Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
Sorry, no.
Mr. Champoux?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Unfortunately, no.
Mr. Chair, that is 9 nay, et 1 yea.
Merci. Donc, la
Thank you. So the motion is defeated. So we'll move on to your second motion, Mr. Champoux. You already read it. I'll just read it again quickly. That the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advises the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. I don't think there will be any long debate on this, but I will still give you a chance if anyone has a comment on this motion. No comments? So, Madam Clerk, I will turn it back over to you so we can vote. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Oui.
Ms. DeBruson?
Yes.
Mr. Housefather?
Oui.
Ms. Ian?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
I vote for the motion.
Mr. Aitchison?
Yay.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Wah?
Yes.
Mr. Champoux?
Oui, en faveur.
Ms. McPherson?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's 10 yeas.
Merci.
Thank you. That's not too bad. So I thank Mr. Champoux for tabling motions just so I could have the full experience. Mr. Champoux, I just wanted to thank you all for your patience. I know that I myself don't much like running overtime on meetings, but I appreciate it. And I wanted to congratulate Mr. Reyes for his performance as chair of the committee today. Good work. Thank you. On that note, everyone have a great weekend in your riding, and we'll wait the notice of meeting for our next meetings. Have a great day, everyone.